Hey YouTube, thanks for tuning in to the JustBlueFish channel. I'm Guy, and today we're going to take a look at the Rolex Explorer. If you saw my previous video on my first impressions of the Rolex Explorer, I said I would be doing a full-length, full-featured review on this watch in the coming weeks. So here it is today on the table. I'm ready to go ahead and dive into that. Now this is very likely going to be an extremely long video, so buckle up and get ready to hear a whole lot about this wristwatch. The Rolex Explorer, reference 214270, is usually described as a rugged sports watch. It has a heritage that goes back to 1953 with the mountaineering expeditions of the Himalayas and the summit of Mount Everest. Now, coming in at $6,550 MSRP, you might ask yourself, does the quality match the sticker price? I'm not sure if I can answer that for you, but certainly the Explorer is a high quality watch. With the 3132 caliber Rolex movement and its advertised plus or minus 2 seconds per day of precision, it's an incredibly accurate watch. The 904L stainless steel and sapphire crystal are considered to be some of the most durable materials on the market, and with the addition of the Parachrome hairspring and Paraflex shock absorbers added to the movement in a recent update, we get excellent resistance to magnetism as well as shock absorption. Now, without even bringing the bracelet with Oyster Lock safety clasp into the discussion, on paper this is a very high quality sports watch. However, whether or not the quality matches the sticker price is going to be up to you to decide. Now, hopefully, with this review, I will be able to help you with making that decision for yourself. So, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into this review video. We're going to talk about overall specifications first, just get all of the numbers out of the way, consider in regard to the size of the watch and the measurements and all of, again, the specs. After that, we're going to talk about the movement quite a bit. Then we'll talk about the quality, the design, the features, and functionality. After that, I'll give you my closing thoughts and feelings on this watch in general, and that'll basically be it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull this watch out of the box here, zoom in a little bit closer so you can see it a bit better, and get the ball rolling. Alright guys, be right back. So the general specifications on this watch are as follows. It is constructed of 904L stainless steel. It is built into an Oyster Case with a smooth bezel. The overall diameter of this guy from side to side is coming in at 39 millimeters, and the lug width from a little bit of dust there, sorry. The lug width here is 20 millimeters. The overall thickness comes in at about 12 millimeters on my calipers, and the overall height from the top to the bottom of the lugs comes in at roughly 47 millimeters. So overall, I think a very well proportioned wristwatch. Now, this watch does feature a Rolex's screw down twin lock crown. It has a scratch resistant sapphire crystal over the black dial, which features a highly legible 3-hand analog display with Chroma Light luminescence. We have a water resistance of 100 meters or 330 feet, and it is powered by Rolex's 3132 perpetual self-winding movement. Now, speaking of that movement, we're going to go ahead and start the discussion with that, and we'll get into the overall design features and functionality in a little bit. The perpetual caliber 3132 in-house Rolex movement runs at a rate of 28,800 beats or vibrations per hour, and it features a 48-hour power reserve. The self-winding mechanical movement is powered by their perpetual rotor. Now, Rolex developed that perpetual rotor technology in 1931. You have a half-moon shaped oscillating weight which spins inside the watch 360 degrees around and around, automatically powering the movement as your wrist moves. It's also fit with their red reversing wheel to enable bi-directional winding and what they like to call optimal efficiency. I think that's a pretty standard feature in all watches now, so none of this should really be news to you, other than the fact that in the 1930s, Rolex was pioneering this technology. Now, in a more recent update, they equipped the movement with a blue Parachrome hairspring. That new hairspring is made in a combination of materials to create the it's made of an alloy of a combination of materials, including niobium, zirconium, and oxygen, and that makes the material insensitive to magnetic fields and temperature variations. So what this means is that you have 10 times more precise watch that is more resilient to shock than a traditional hairspring. In the end, what this does is it makes it more accurate and reliable. So, that's ultimately what we care about. The hairspring also uses an overcoil, which ensures regularity of the watch in any position. Now, also added to this movement relatively recently is the Paraflex shock absorbers. These were developed in 2005, and it improves the shock resistance by up to 50%. The geometry of the spring ensures that it remains firmly positioned without the risk of deformation, and this technology has undergone extensive shock testing to prove its reliability. Now, since we're kind of talking about the precision, regularity, reliability, and ultimately accuracy, let's have a little discussion about this watch. Rolex is kind of in general, and accuracy. The 3132 is a COSC certified movement, which means that Rolex sends the movements out for certification, and that has to meet a standard of no more than -4 seconds per day to no more than +6 seconds per day. The Chronometer certification is distinguished by 15 days of testing at the facility, wherever that is that they send these things to get tested. After they're returned to Rolex, further testing happens. In 2015, Rolex redefined their quote-unquote superlative chronometer certification. So what that means is once they get the movement back from COSC with its ±4 to 6 certification, it's put into the case, and the watch is retested and adjusted to meet the new superlative standard of a precision of no more than ±2 seconds per day. Now, that's pretty amazing accuracy for any mechanical watch, be it a Rolex, an Omega, Seiko, anything. ±2 seconds per day is outstanding. Now, that's one of the main reasons why I purchased this watch. Was I want not just something that's attractive to look at, not just something that is a status symbol. As a matter of fact, I don't care about the status at all. What I wanted, or was most interested in, is the engineering of this watch. So accuracy is extremely important to me. So I did a lot of testing on my own when I got this guy, and here's what I found out. First of all, I do own a time grapher. So when I got it home, I put it on the time grapher and tested it in all 6 positions, the 6th position being a little unnecessary. But those positions are sitting dial up, sitting dial down, sitting crown up, crown left, and then also crown down. Now the 6th position that you can test it in is crown to the right. In all of those positions, my watch ran between +4 seconds per day being the fastest in the dial up position, and -1 second per day being the slowest in the crown up position. Now, ultimately, that really doesn't mean anything. What matters is how does it keep time while you wear it on the wrist? For me, over the course of 2 weeks, my watch was running about 3.5 seconds fast per day. And that was if I was wearing the watch on my wrist for 12 to 16 hours a day, and then storing it in my watch case dial up for the remaining 12 to 10 hours per day. I was gaining a very consistent 3.5 seconds per day. Now, having already put this on my time grapher, I knew that if I were to store it crown up overnight, it would probably lose a little bit of time, but I didn't know how much. So after my 2-week-long test, I decided, okay, I'm going to do this test over, and I'm going to, instead of storing it in my watch case dial up, I'm going to store it crown up. Well, the problem with that is I don't really want to store the watch crown up. I can't put it in my watch case that way. But for the purposes of this test, I figured I'll go ahead and do it. I found a place where I could rest the watch overnight in that position. Over the course of the 2 weeks, in that configuration, I was gaining about 1.5 seconds per day. So, if I want to wear and store the watch the way that I want to, I'm outside of their advertised standards for accuracy, again, at +3.5, instead of being within -2 to +2. However, if I'm willing to quote-unquote self-regulate it and set the watch on its side overnight like so, I would be well within their accuracy ratings at +1.5 per day. Again, that's not how I want to store my watch. I don't want to set it on top of my watch case like this every night. I want it inside the case, protected from dust and debris and humidity. I live in South Florida. It can get very warm outside and humidity creeps in the house. So I want to store it in a ideal environment, which is inside my watch case. But I really can't do it if I want to achieve the accuracy potential of this watch by storing it overnight in this position. That's a little bit of an annoyance. Now, I suspect that I could send the watch into Rolex and tell them, these are my wearing habits, and these are the results that I'm getting with this watch. And I bet they would try at least to regulate it for me, to slow it down a nudge, so that when I store it dial up overnight, I'm within that ±2 seconds per day. I don't know if I want to do that, though. I'm going to be without the watch for a while. I've heard on the internet people say that, it might come back worse. Maybe they don't do a good job. I mean, that's hearsay. I don't know that that's true or not, but that would be awful if I sent it in and now suddenly it's running +6 seconds per day or something, or -6 or -4 or whatever, right? Like, I'm probably just going to settle on good enough and deal with the fact that if I want it to be as accurate as possible, I'm going to have to store it in a position that I don't prefer. Or just live with the fact that it's running a little bit faster than advertised if I want to store it the way that I would prefer. Now, yeah, so that's the moral of the story with accuracy. I've heard of other people that claim that their watch runs fractions of a second fast per day. Like over the course of a week, they're saying, oh, I've gained 2 seconds this whole week. I mean, that would be awesome. I wish mine ran that good. But it does not. It still is, even with this highly refined and very expensive watch, it is still, to a degree, luck of the draw. I mean, it's a much better draw than if you were talking about, say, a Seiko, which is a watch that I love. Don't get me wrong. I love many, many, many Seikos. But with a Seiko, you get a watch that runs +5 seconds a day. You get a watch that runs +30 seconds per day. It is what it is. You're drawn from a much deeper deck. With a Rolex, I suspect that while it is still somewhat a luck of the draw, I was probably on the bad side of the draw in getting a watch that runs a little bit faster than I would prefer. But still, it's not like I drew, it's not like I drew a 7 deuce. I still got like a nice pocket pair, if we're talking poker analogies. Anyway, yeah, so that's what, I can tell you about the accuracy of this particular individual and what they advertise in general. So, if you're moving forward thinking about Rolexes and if accuracy is an important issue for you, take that information as a data point and, maybe it'll help you make a decision. Now, since we're also talking about the movement here, there's one other thing I do want to discuss. When I first picked this watch up, and of course I know that this is an automatic watch. I know that it has the perpetual rotor inside of the watch that spins and that self-winds it. But when I first picked this watch up, if I didn't know that information and somebody handed me this watch and I just gave it a little bit of a wiggle, I would say, wow, like there's nothing inside there spinning. It was dead silent. You couldn't feel anything. I mean, in comparison to other much less expensive automatic watches, which you can feel and hear the rotors spinning freely, this watch was dead silent. However, over the course of some weeks, I started noticing a little bit of noise. If I had the watch on my wrist and maybe I lifted my hand up to my head, like if I was putting my phone up, or if I just picked it up and gave it a little bit of a shake, I could start hearing something inside there rattling around a little bit. Now, is this a problem or not? Does it indicate that there's a problem? I don't really know for sure. I went back to the dealer, the AD where I bought this, and I showed it to him and said this was dead silent, and now it makes a little bit of noise. And he said, I don't think it's a problem. I also called up Rolex and told them the same thing, and they said, well, it's probably not a problem, but you can send it in if you want it to be looked at. It'll take weeks and weeks and weeks to get it back to you. It's up to you. Now, what I can tell you is the watch is running perfectly. It's not running out of power on my wrist. It's not losing or gaining time any more or less than it has been since I've owned it. So I'm going to err on the side of it's probably not a problem, and maybe things just loosen up a little bit. If it becomes a problem, I have a 5-year warranty, so I can always send it in. But I wanted to point that out, that was a little question mark that popped up for me, was why did this watch go from being absolutely dead silent to making a little bit of a rattling noise? Is it just the rotor spinning around in there? Is it something else? I can't say for certain, but you know, when you're talking about a watch that's plus or minus $6,000 and anything pops up, for me, you know, I address it like, this might be a concern. So yeah, there's a little bit of a negative about this particular examples movement that I wanted to tell you guys about. Now, moving along, let's talk about the quality, design, features, functionality portion of this review video. This watch, well, we'll start with the case. This watch is a 904L stainless steel Oyster Case. Beautiful, beautiful, almost jewelry quality case. You know, it is fantastic. It is also a smudge magnet, so let's try and clean this up for this portion of the discussion here. Sorry about that. Now, the Oyster Case was created by Rolex in... dust. Alright, the Oyster Case was created by Rolex in 1926, and it was, as they explain it, the first waterproof case. The patented system works with the bezel, case back, and crown all screwing down against the middle case, sealing it from water, dust, debris, the elements. Because of this design, all Oyster cased Rolex watches are guaranteed to a minimum depth of 100 meters in water resist. Of course, the Submariners and the Sea Dwellers and other watches in the Oyster line are more water resistant, but all of their Oyster cased watches have a minimum of 100 meter depth of water resistance. This watch has a polished bezel, so we'll zoom in here pretty close. Very, very highly polished bezel, and the sides of the case are also extremely highly polished. Again, it's almost like a jewelry quality level of finishing on this watch. It's absolutely fantastic and outstanding. The rest of the case features a sort of satin brushed finish, and that includes the top of the lugs. That includes the bracelet end links, which not exactly part of the case, but it's where the case and the bracelet join. And of course, the case back as a brushed finish. The screw down case back is absolutely naked. There's no branding, no printing, there's nothing on there. Not being familiar with Rolexes, 6, 8, 9 months ago, whenever I started looking at these guys, I was a little surprised when I saw that, because every other manufacturer sort of makes it a point to embellish and decorate their casebacks, but not Rolex. They just leave it naked or virgin or however you'd like to describe that. I think that's actually pretty cool. I like that. There's no time or effort wasted on it. It's just functional. It's, just there to be to secure the movement and to protect it from moisture, debris, or anything else. Now again, this is made of 904L. Most of us are going to be pretty familiar with 316L if we have cheaper watches in our collection, and we're looking at this as maybe our first luxury or high-end piece like I did. Now there's some information about 904L that I'd like to share with you. 904L has greater amounts of chromium and nickel in it, and because of this, it has a better resistance to corrosion. So, in particular salt water or water in general, it's going to be much more corrosion resistance because of that 904L. 904L apparently, also probably because of the chromium and nickel, has a very high luster compared to 316L. So you get a similar look that you could get from precious metals. It has that same degree of potential to be shined up. Again, like I said, this just because of because of the quality of the steel and the amount of effort that they put into polishing this watch, it does just look like a beautiful piece of jewelry on all of these polished parts. And the brushed parts are equally as attractive in my opinion. Now 904L also has a higher Rockwell hardness than 316, so it should be more scratch resistant. With the caveat that for me, this is the biggest scratch magnet watch that I own. I own several more affordable, much more affordable watches that are obviously just going to be made out of 316. And I don't baby this any more than I baby those or vice versa. And this is really the only watch that I've had where I've picked up any sort of scratches, nicks, or damages. And it's been very, very minor. But I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's zoom in on the bezel here. Just below the 9 o'clock position over here on the bezel. Right there, I don't know if you see that. I picked up a nick right on the middle there of the bezel. I don't know how that happened. Like, I've never banged this watch to get anything, and there's a very deep nick right there. It's tiny, and on your wrist from, 3 feet away when you just glance down at the watch, unless you catch it in very bright light, it disappears like that. You can't even tell it's there, really. But if you catch the watch right in the right light, it's like, bang, you see that nick in the bezel. Not a big deal. It's not like I'm going to cry about it or anything, but I just want to point out that, like, all of my other watches made of much cheaper metal, I haven't scratched or nicked the material at all. And of course, I'm picking up more dust here. Let me give it a little wipe. On the side of the case, I don't know if this will pick up very well or not, particularly with all of the smudgies. I have picked up some scuff marks, and maybe they're showing up there. Picked up several scuff marks on this side of the case. Again, I'm not like putting this through hard use or abuse, and these are minor little scuff marks. Don't take it as I'm complaining or crying or I need to polish them out or anything. I'm just pointing out that while this is advertised to be more durable and scratch resistant because it's got a higher Rockwell hardness, and I'm not going to argue the science on that and say like, oh, the science is wrong. I'm just saying in my case, I'm not finding this to be overly durable or resistant to scratches. Very, very easy on especially these polished surfaces to scratch the watch. I also got a very big scratch on this link right here, the one that my thumb is covering. And you can't really see it anymore because I buffed it out, but you can kind of tell I messed up the finish buffing the scratch out, but I had a really nasty looking scratch on that. And more or less I was able to clean it up. Zoomed in real tight here, you can kind of see the inconsistency of the finish on that particular link. But I walked, this one I know, like when I did it, I walked past a door and just kind of scraped it. But I was like, holy mackerel, that is quite the gouge. So yeah, all I'm basically saying here is that don't think that because this is 904L stainless steel, it's going to be impervious to scratches. That's not the case whatsoever. Very easy to scratch this watch in my experience. And I try very hard to keep the watch in the best possible condition. Again, I have a $220 Seiko SKX. There's not a scratch on that watch, and I bang that watch all around. I'm not even concerned about scratching that watch, and I'm a little concerned about scratching such an expensive watch in this Rolex here. But it's like I can't scratch that Seiko watch, but I have no problems unknowingly picking up scratches on this Rolex. So while the 904L is a very attractive material, while it probably is more corrosion resistant, and while the statistics state that it has a higher Rockwell hardness and should be more scratch resistant, in my experience so far over the last month, it still is very easy to get minor nicks and scratches on your watch. So if that's something that concerns you, just keep that in mind. Now moving on from the case discussion, let's talk about the crown briefly. This is, again, a screw-down twin-lock crown. identify it as a twin lock by the little slash or dash underneath the crown logo or the Rolex coronet logo. If it has 1 dot, 2 dots, or a dash, it is denoted as being the twin lock, as opposed to having 3 dots being the triple lock. The twin lock crown is a piece of the puzzle that guarantees that this watch is 100 meters of water resistance, because within the stem and crown here you have 2 seals, rubber gasket type seals. So that is what gives us, in part, the superior waterproofness of a Rolex watch. I have gotten this watch wet several times, like submerged wet. No problems with leaking of any type. I have 100% confidence in this watch maintaining its waterproofness. Now the crown itself, again, it's screw down, and unscrewing it is very, very easy, but it has a couple of minor idiosyncrasies that I want to show you guys. When you're unscrewing this crown, now number one, it's tiny. It is a very small crown, so I mean getting a grip on it's not super hard, but I just want to point out that it is low profile, relatively. So as you're screwing this crown out, I want to show you, watch when it pops out. It's going to spring out here once I get it all the way unthreaded right there. But usually, let's see if it does it, it's not all the way out. I kind of have to give it a little bit of another wiggle. There, I don't know if you saw that. It popped out even further there. That always happens with this watch. It kind of, when I unscrew it, the spring pushes out a little bit, and then I kind of got to give it a little wiggle to get it come out all the way. I don't know if that's normal or if that's a problem. It would seem to me that that shouldn't be the way that it works, if I'm being honest. But it doesn't seem to be an actual issue. It's just I get 2 little stages of it popping out. So now once it's out, I'm in the hand wind mode, and I could spin the crown to hand wind it, and you know that functions flawlessly, of course. Now I said there was a couple of idiosyncrasies. The second idiosyncrasy is that when I spin this watch in the reverse, or the crown in the reverse direction, I can feel and hear little clicks. Now, the reason why that's weird to me is because when I first got this, and for, again, weeks after getting it, that did not do that at all. And the first time I noticed, it's not like I spent a bunch of time winding this crown in the wrong direction. That would be idiotic. But the way I noticed it was I was just feeling the clicks as I was unwinding it from the threads to unscrew it. And then I was like, oh, that's weird. It's kind of like clicking as I'm unscrewing this from the threads. And then it popped out and I gave it a few reverse spins and I was like, huh, I'm feeling a little like resistance or clickiness reverse winding it. That seemed to manifest at the same time as the noise from the rotor inside the movement, which I talked about a little while ago. How I said that as the rotor is spinning, I assume it's the rotor is spinning, I'm hearing it spin now, whereas it used to be dead silent. Though that and this sort of clicking when I reverse wind the crown manifested again at the same time, I think, roughly. You know, they're very little subtle things, so I'm not sure exactly. And again, I don't know if this is a problem. It doesn't seem to affect the functionality of the watch at all. It's just something that I noticed recently as, as I've owned the watch. So yeah, anyway, unscrewing the crown and re-screwing the crown down, very, very smooth, very simple. The threading feels magnificent. It's just butter. Winding the watch is also just buttery glass smooth. The other issue with the crown, I guess there's a third one, and it's not necessarily the crown. It's to do with setting the time. We'll talk about that in a little bit when I actually discuss the dial and the handsets. But there's kind of a third issue with the crown / handsets that I'll tell you guys about. And again, these aren't major issues. I want to make that clear. It's just little things that I wouldn't expect in a watch at this price point. You know, I wouldn't expect the movement to be dead silent and then suddenly start making noise. I wouldn't expect the crown to just start making this weird clicking noise out of the blue. And the third thing that I'm going to talk about. Now, before we talk about the dial and the handsets, let's just talk about the crystal. There's not a whole lot to say. It is a sapphire highly scratch resistant sapphire crystal. It looks very nice looking through it, with the exception of, and I cannot find this out anywhere, does it have AR coating? I'm not sure. It does. It's very reflective. I noticed that. You guys can probably see in the video as I kind of rotate it around. I'll get it towards the light. Very, very reflective. I've heard people on forums suggest that these crystals have an anti-reflective coating on the underside, but not on the top. I don't know if that's true. There's no information in any of Rolex's literature to suggest that this crystal is anti-reflective. But it is, a sapphire crystal, so it's going to be very scratch resistant. Also, as you look at the side, the crystal sits a little proud of the bezel. So I would imagine if you're not a little bit careful, it's going to be easy to kind of chip the edges of that crystal. If you were to just nick or chip the edges there, I can see that happening relatively easily because of how tall above the bezel it stands. If you have to replace the crystal, I don't think that it's a hugely cost prohibitive proposition, but be careful with it if you care about keeping your stuff nice and new. If this is just sort of a beater watch for you, like if you got that kind of money that you can have a $6,000 plus or minus dollar beater watch, then don't worry about it. But I just want to point that out to people that might not be aware of how that is, how that looks, how that works. But yeah, AR coating, kind of a mystery. I've heard people suggest that it is coated on the underside but not on the top side, but I can't find any confirmation from Rolex's website or literature to confirm that. Now moving on, let's talk about the dial, the handset, and the rehaut. It's like the flange inside the dial. Let's talk about that first. If we get in really close here, you can see that wall, and it says Rolex, Rolex, Rolex all around it. That's called a rehaut or rehaut. I believe another acceptable term for it is the flange. Up at the 12 o'clock position, you can see that there's the crown or coronet logo. On mine, that is off-center from the 12 o'clock hash mark ever so slightly. I've heard of other people have that same complaint. Going around from the 1 o'clock side, the X's should line up relatively right on each hour marker, which mine are maybe off a hair, but, only at this like super zoomed in level can I even notice it. And then after the 6 o'clock side, you should have the R's all lining up on the hour markers, which they do more or less. Again, they might be off by a hair. But that little coronet or crown logo up at the 12 o'clock position is just to the 1 o'clock side in alignment. And also on the crystal, I don't know how well it'll show up, there is the etched crown logo. You can kind of see it there, like above the 6 on the glass of the crystal. I'm not going to be able to get a good picture of it. But I did want to also mention that there is this laser etched crown in the glass right there. So yeah, that's taking a look there at the flange. We'll call it the flange because I don't know how to correctly pronounce that word. Rehaut. I don't know. Now the real featured presentation of this watch is the dial. We have this beautiful black dial with the 369 indices. The hour markers are all baton style hour markers with the exception of the upside down triangle at the 12 o'clock position. The markers are all outlined. They're obviously applied markers, and they are all outlined with 18 karat gold. All of the batons, the 3, the 6, the 9, the triangle, all have a beautiful gold, 18 karat white gold outlines. This dial is what, when I saw this dial is what just made me want this watch more than anything. And for months and months and the better part of a year, it was just like an obsession for me. I thought it was the most beautifully designed dial presentation that I had ever seen. And I looked and looked and looked for alternatives that were more affordable. I've tried many, many watches, but none of them really filled the itch of what this watch looked like. So I love this dial design. I think it's just downright magnificent. Now, moving on, we have the 3 handset Mercedes style, also in 18 karat gold. The Mercedes style hour hand, the, of course, long minute hand, and the second hand with the little lollipop pip out there towards the chapter ring, and then a little bit of a pip at the counterbalance side as well. The handsets on the previous generation of the 214270 were a little bit smaller, and it was redesigned in 2016, I believe, to have the hour hand reach all the way out to the chapter ring, and it also beefed them up so they weren't so thin and delicate looking. Excellent decision, Rolex, to do that. I think I might have, I don't know, I might have still wanted this watch, but I'm glad that they made that modification to the handset. It looks great. Now, on the outer chapter ring of this dial, you have pretty simple, just hash marks for each minute or second, depending on your perspective, with slightly thicker, more embellished hash marks at every 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on marker. It's just printed on the dial. It's not any sort of applied markers at all, but you know, it's very cleanly printed. It's not anything to, you know, be disappointed with as far as the quality goes. And then, of course, down at the bottom on the chapter ring, you have the Swiss-made, I don't know, logo branding. It's probably not the right word. Tag, whatever. It says Swiss-made down there at the bottom as well. Now, for the actual branding on this watch dial, up at the 12 o'clock side, you have the Rolex crown, you have the Rolex name logo, and then Oyster Perpetual. My handset is sort of covering it, but on the 6 o'clock side, you have the Explorer notation with Superlative Chronometer, officially certified, underneath that. None of this branding is distracting or obtrusive. It works with the flow and the design of the watch just fine. It looks great. The printing, again, is nice and clean and crisp. You know, some people, particularly, let's talk about Seiko's, people complain that Seiko started adding this Pro Specs branding to the dials of a lot of their watches that previously didn't feature it, and they complain about it. So I know some people can be a little bit sensitive about what's printed on their dial as far as branding goes. I like everything about this dial personally. To call it perfect would be an understatement. For me, you know, your opinion might be different, but for me. Now, the last thing that we did not talk about in regards to the dial and handset is the luminescence or glow-in-the-dark potential. Every single indice from the triangle all at the 12 o'clock position and all of the square baton markers, as well as the 3, 6, and 9, feature Rolex's Chroma Light luminescent material. The handsets also feature it, including the second hand pip on the pointer side. What can I tell you about the Chroma Light? You know, I'm going to obviously roll in some footage of the Chroma Light in action for you so you can see it a little bit better, but it's fantastic. I mean, very, very bright, lasts more than enough time. It looks fantastic in that blue coloration. You know, it blows me away. According to Rolex, it stays luminescent 2 times as long as other standard phosphorescent coatings. And, you know, also to note, the previous versions, some of the previous versions of this watch did not feature luminescent material on the 3, 6, and 9. They were just solid white gold markers. Again, with the change that they made to the handset, they made the change over to the 3, 6, and 9 to have them feature the luminescence, Chroma Light luminescence material, just like the rest of the markers on the dial. And I think that was a brilliant design decision on Rolex's part. It really brings it all together, in my opinion. Now, the next thing, more or less, I guess the last thing to talk about, is going to be the bracelet on this guy. I'm going to zoom the camera out slightly just so we can get a little bit of a wider shot and see the bracelet better. So, be right back. Alright, this uses Rolex's Oyster bracelet, which is used on several of their sports model watches. I don't think they're all the exact same size, but, you know, more or less the same technology, right? Now, this bracelet does have solid end links. They're very, very good. If you ever want to remove the end links from the watch, though, you're going to want to get a special tool to do it. A, to not scratch up the lugs or the links or the bracelet or the watch in general. And B, because a normal little spring bar does not fit in there very good. I bought a tool by Bergeron. I forget the model number off the top of my head. I'll put a link in the notes below if I remember, but I'll do a review on that tool and how it makes removing the bracelet from this watch extremely easy. But yes, we have solid end links on this Oyster style bracelet. The bracelet is brushed 904L stainless steel, and the brushing is very, very well done and attractive, except for that one link that I sort of scratched a while back. So I'll just give you kind of a look. The brushing on the clasp, also very good. And the rest of the way around. The sides of the links are polished, and the side of the bracelet is also very highly polished, which means that it's very highly smudged all the time, if I'm being honest. The bracelet starts out at 20 millimeters up here where it meets the case at the end link. And something that nobody pointed out to me is that it tapers. Like in pictures, you don't really see this too much. It's not as apparent in pictures as it is in person, but the taper is very extreme. It tapers down to 15 millimeters down at the very bottom where it meets up with the clasp. I think that's too much, if I'm being honest. I would prefer it if it didn't taper down to such a thin measurement here. 16 maybe even as wide as 18, just a slight taper would be my preference. You know, your mileage may vary on that. Some people probably love it. Other people probably hate it. I'm sort of in the middle. I have, a preference of that I wish it didn't taper quite so much. But it still works. It's okay. It's just a lot of taper. Now, so that's negative number one about the bracelet. Negative number two about the bracelet. I'm not in love with the bracelet, honestly. I mean, it works. It's high quality. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just not in love with it. Because of, again, we got the taper. Number two is the screws to resize this bracelet. It's difficult to resize them, and here's why. You need a very particular screwdriver to fit these screws perfectly if you don't want to risk marring up the head of the screw, potentially falling out of the slot and scratching your links. You want a 1.7 millimeter screwdriver with a hollow ground bit, not a tapered bit, so that it fits into those slots perfectly and evenly all the way throughout. Nobody makes such a thing, really. Rolex has this little tool called the reference tool, screwdriver reference 2100, that they used to distribute, I guess with the Sea Dweller a while back, that does fit those screw heads perfectly. That's the only thing available that is a perfect fit. You can find 1.6 millimeter hollow ground screwdrivers from Horotech, I believe, or you could use a taper bit 1.6 millimeter from Bergeron, for example. But my understanding is none of them fit perfectly, and you are risking A, deforming the screw slot, B, falling out of the slot and potentially scratching up the side link, or just slipping out and scratching anything, honestly. So if you're the type of person like me that likes to monkey around with your watches and resize them yourself and have all of that capability at home, on the secondary market, those Rolex screwdrivers, the reference 2100 that I mentioned, I can't find one on eBay or anywhere else for under $150, which I have not purchased. But the moral of the story is that you're going to spend a fair amount of money on that tool if you want the exact perfect tool. And if you want to make that sacrifice or compromise and get a less than perfect tool, you run the risk, or more of a risk, of potentially doing a little bit of damage to your watch. So keep that in mind. Now, the clasp, this is, of course, the Oyster safety clasp. It has, first of all, the fold over with the Rolex coronet or crown. The whole thing is brushed and it looks fantastic, with the exception of the sides being a nice polished finish that is smudged to death. The fold over safety portion very easily folds and unfolds. One thing to note about this, if you were to manage to somehow catch the clasp on something under there, you see how I did that? You could accidentally unhinge your safety portion. So keep that in mind, that it is not locked into place, you could still unhook it inadvertently. Once you open the safety fold over, you have this little lever, and that opens the Oyster lock clasp. The folding elbow portion of the clasp is highly polished and a little bit decorated. I mean, it's got this nice looking Rolex logo, but again, it is very highly polished. The level of finish that went into this clasp is pretty impressive. Overall, it's quite good, with a caveat. The Easy Link extension on this guy. So the way this works is there's this little extension link. Right now I've closed it. If at some point during the course of the day you needed the watch to be just a little bit bigger because you're hot or it's muggy out or your wrist swells up, you can unpop this, and then it folds out and adds 5 millimeters to the overall length of the bracelet. In theory, that sounds brilliant. In practice, for me, it's borderline useless, if I'm being honest. 5 millimeters is too much. I never need an extra 5 millimeters. When I'm wearing the bracelet normally, when my wrist starts getting a little sweaty and the bracelet starts feeling tight and uncomfortable, I mean, I need like 2 millimeters, realistically. Now, you can adjust this bracelet even slighter, but you need a tool to do it. If you get in here, it's going to be difficult to illustrate on camera. You can see on this, you probably can't see it, but anyway, what you can do, where the Easy Link thing mounts inside there, you can use a tool to move it back and forth a couple of millimeters. There's 3 slots in there. That's enough for, you know, when I need a minor modification. The problem is I don't carry a tool around with me to do that whenever I want to, right? So the moral of the story is, on paper, that Easy Link 5 millimeter extension is a brilliant idea, again on paper, but in practice I find it to be borderline useless, if I'm being completely honest. It's a swing and a miss, you know. It was a valiant effort. It was a real good swing, but ultimately, in my opinion, it was a miss. Now, finally, and you know, I've had a number of complaints about this bracelet. Nothing major. I mean, I like it, but I don't love it. And here's the main thing. The edges of this bracelet are the inside edges in particular, and this applies to the case as well, this edge here. It's all very, very sharp. There's nothing smoothed or rounded or dehorned about this watch. So what that means is when it's on the wrist and you're wearing it all day, if it's resting in one position, because it does have a little bit of heft to it. Like if my wrist is like this and the watch is just resting there, just pretend this is the Oyster bracelet. And when I move it, I'm going to have these deep imprints. And it's not that the watch is too tight, because I could go in here and just like this, I could fit my finger through there. The watch is not too tight. It's just that the edges are very crisp and hard and borderline sharp, and it really bites into your skin, at least for me. Now, if I make the bracelet a little bit bigger, you know, I can kind of rattle my wrist around and slide it around, you know, and I'm constantly doing that. I'm trying to like slide it back and forth just so it's not resting in the same spot all the time. And this is only an issue when it's like really warm and my wrist is starting to get a little bit sweaty and the watch doesn't move super freely because it kind of wants to stick to the spot that it's sitting in. When I'm nice and cool and dry, like it slips around enough just when I'm moving my wrist that it doesn't become an issue. But in those cases where, like, again, I'm already uncomfortable, I find that this bracelet makes me even more uncomfortable. Am I going to get rid of it? Am I going to put it on a leather strap or some other NATO strap? I mean, I tried a NATO strap. I didn't like it. It did lose a lot of weight from that perspective. Actually, I thought that was cool, that it wasn't so heavy on the wrist. But the Oyster bracelet looks great, and it's only mildly annoying in those few complaints that I've had. So, you know, I deal with it. But at the price point, I'm not super happy about the bracelet, you know? I mean, I wish that it was more comfortable. I think, you know, and maybe even look better, given that I don't like the taper of it too much. But anyway, that's, you know, everything I got to tell you about the bracelet. You know, I forgot to show you that one last little problem that I had, and that was with setting the handset. So let me go back and kind of show you that since I still have the crown out. So when you pull the crown out to the position to set the time, you can see that the movement hacks and the second hand stops as you would expect. But when you spin the hands, getting it to stay exactly where you want it, like let's say I wanted to set it to 46 after. You can see I'm between 46 and 47. You see how it moves? I'm getting a lot of glare there, sorry. Like it doesn't, it's difficult. As I release the pressure, it kind of snaps back to where it was. So you kind of got to just go to the marker, and then even then you just stop. It's difficult to get it exactly where you want it. I don't know why there's such a large amount of spring tension. You see, I'm not spinning it, right? Like I'm pressure and then I just release the pressure and it snaps back and forth. Not a huge deal. It's just I like to go past on most of my watches and then come back to where I want to set it. But oftentimes it kind of just is a little bit difficult. It's a little finicky to get it set exactly where you want it. You know, again, very minor issue, not something to write home about. I also didn't point out when I was talking about the crown that when it's extended, it is quite a bit wobbly. I have other watches that are way less wobbly than that. I thought that was a little strange considering such a high quality watch that the crown has quite a fair amount of wobble in it when it's extended out. But, you know, screwing it back in, again, it's super buttery smooth and easy to catch the threads, and I never feel like I'm at risk of cross-threading it or anything. So yeah, sorry I forgot to mention that little tidbit of information when I was talking about the crown and the dial before. So yeah, backtracking there. Anyway, that's more or less everything that we're going to talk about. My closing thoughts on this guy. You know, the Explorer 214270 is most certainly a great watch, but it's not without some of its negatives. First, it's the price. For the average person, plus or minus $6,000 is a lot of money. To go back to that original question, does the quality justify the price? For me, I think so. But, you know, only you can answer that for yourself. You know, like I said, there are some negatives, you know, a number of minor annoyances for me that I've already discussed. You know, I like, but I don't love the bracelet. To achieve the advertised accuracy, I have to rest the watch crown up, which is a position that I would prefer to not store my watch in because it precludes me from being able to keep it in my watch case. The polished portions of the 904L steel seem to attract scratches like a magnet for me, despite the supposed durability and overall Rockwell hardness being higher than your average 316L. And then there's the movement in the crown, you know, starting to make some weird noises that they never made when I first took them out of the box. And that's a little bit of a question mark for me. But, you know, I can't be certain if that's normal or not without sending it all the way into Rolex for inspection. But it is an absolutely beautiful watch. In many ways, it's, you know, a marvel of design and engineering. And I could easily see it serve as a person's one and only watch for any occasion, and I'm sure it would most likely last a lifetime. But again, can I say beyond a shadow of a doubt that this watch justifies the price? Yeah, for me it does. I do love it, even despite some of the very minor negatives and nitpicky annoyances that I wanted to, you know, that I threw out there just to make it clear for you guys my feelings on this watch. I'm happy to have it in my collection. I feel lucky to, you know, be able to have purchased this watch, and, you know, hopefully I end up keeping it forever. Well, that's everything, guys. I appreciate you tuning in and watching this video. I know it ran pretty long. I hope you stuck around all the way to the end. If you did, my last little message for you is to help support the channel, please. Down in the notes section below, you will find links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all my social media, as well as my Patreon account. If you want to sponsor the channel and make a small monthly donation through Patreon, it'll help me out in providing more content coming forward in the future. I will be back with another video next week, and not sure what we're going to look at yet, but you know, tune in and stick around, and yeah, we will roll out more content as I have products available to review. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.